And as far as the definition, let's start with the name. Now, names
Through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays, and on we'll go. Through the wastelands
are going to be, well, they don't have to necessarily be unique, but it doesn't make sense to have a personal name for a company or a company's name for an individual. So really what we need to do, first of all, is get the type that the customer that is going to be created is going to be. And we can use Faker to do that. So we will use the random element method. And our array is going to have simply I and B, of course, for individual and for business. And then from there, we can determine what the name of this particular customer is going to be. So if the type is equal to an I, then we want to use the name method from Faker, because that is going to give us an individual person's name. Otherwise, we have a business, in which case we want to use the company method to give us a company name. And then we can use that value for the name, and then we have the type, so we'll go ahead and set that value as well. And then for the email, it doesn't matter there. I mean, ideally the email would be somewhat related to the company if this is some kind of business, but we'll just use Faker to give us an email. And then for address, city, and state, we will use Faker's methods to provide those values. So with our customer factory defined, let's hop on over to the invoice factory. And the first thing we will see,
I'm walking alone, the streets are empty. The only thing I can see is my own silhouette. I'm getting stronger, step by step. The clock is ticking, but there's no time for regrets. I've been flying from town to town, from London to Taiwan. I've been all around the globe trying to protect
factory defined, let's hop on over to the invoice factory. And the first thing we will set is the customer ID. Now, one thing that we can do here is to specify that this customer ID is going to come from the customer factory, in which case we need to import that model class. And then for the amount, all we need is some numeric value. And it would be useful to have something that is not 0 and not negative. So we're going to use Faker to give us a number between, let's say, 100 and 20,000.
I used to say, if I hear AI one more time, I'm gonna lose it. But Monday.com is super.
And I would like to be able to invoice for that much. And then we need the status. Now, the status can be one of 3 values. It can be billed, paid, or void. And really, the next 2 fields, the build date and the paid date, depend upon this status. So let's kind of do the same thing where we are going to go ahead and get the status, where we will use Faker to once again give us a random element from an array that contains our statuses. So we have build, we have paid, and then we have void. And then for the build date, really, it doesn't matter what it is because we will always have a build date. So we will go ahead and use Faker to give us a date time value that is going to be sometime this decade. I mean, really, the dates don't matter. This is just test data. And we will keep our timestamps. And I will repeat. Paid date. This bill is indeed. Then we want a date. But, let's just do this. Once again, we will call the this decade method. And if it is not paid, then the value is going to be null. And now that we have our factories, we can use this. them to seed our database. So let's close our factories. Let's go to the Seeders folder, and let's open up Customer Seeder and Invoice Seeder. And really, the database seeder as well, because we will need that too. And now that I think about it, I don't really think we need the invoice seeder, because we can create everything from our customer seeder, because this is exactly what we could do. Let's first of all use our factory method, and let's say that we want at least 25 customers that have 10 invoices each. I mean, we could be just lazy and say that we have 100 customers, they each have 10 invoices. Let's not do that. Let's have a different number of invoices for some of our customers. So we're going to use our factory. We're going to create 25 customers. Each of them will have 25 invoices, and we will create that. So let's just copy and paste, so that then we can have 100 customers that each have 5 invoices. Then we can create another 100 customers that have 3 invoices. And then finally, let's create some customers that have no invoices. And let's make this a small amount. So 5 customers will not have any invoices, and they will just be in our system. So with that, in place, we can go to our database seeder, and inside Outside of the run method, we are going to call the customer seeder, and there we go. So that's now we should be able to go back. Back to the command line, and we will use Artisan to migrate. Let's use fresh, and we also want to seed the database. So if we typed everything correctly, which of course we didn't, so we cannot find the customer seeder, or rather we can't find customer inside of the customer seeder, which of course we need to include. So let's use app models and then customer. Let's go back to the command line. Let's run the fresh migration again, another error. And it looks like that I used fake instead of fake. What was that file? That was customer factory. So let's open up the customer factory and let's change fake to faker. There we go. Let's go back. Let's run the seeder again, and of course we get something incorrect. Column not found, build date. And why is that? So let's go to the migration, and I probably typed something incorrect. That was inside of invoice, so we have build date TED. And that's what I get for typing and talking at the same time. It's not that easy, at least it's not for me. So now, finally, hooray, everything works. See what I get for typing and talking at the same time. Time. It's not that easy, at least it's not for me. So now, finally, hooray, everything works. We have our stuff. And so now that we have all of our data in the database, we can start developing our API in the next lesson. APIs are software. They are a specialized kind of software, but ultimately they are software. We write them, we release them, we fix bugs, and then we decide to add new features so that we can release a new version. However, our users are developers. They are using our APIs in their applications, and anything that we change could break their applications. So unlike conventional applications, we need to version our APIs so that as we release new versions, our old versions are still there, they're functioning, and developers who are using those old versions can opt into the new features in the new versions, or they can continue to use the older versions. So unfortunately, this means that we have to not only keep track of all of the different versions, but we have to keep them inside of our project. But that's just the nature of developing an API. So one of the easiest ways to do this is to segregate the different pieces that we need for different versions. And the controllers are really the most important because those are what are handling the requests. So this is what I typically do. Inside of the controllers folder, I will create a new folder simply called API. The idea being that this is the folder where all of the API controllers live. This is especially useful if you have a project that is both a typical web application that is serving HTML, but you also have an API that you need to provide as well. And then inside of the API folder, this is where I would have the version folders. So this is our first version, so we're just going to call it V1. And then we will put inside of there the controllers that we need, such as the customer controller and the invoice controller. So let's go ahead and let's move those there. And of course, we need to do more than just isolate these files. We need to change their namespaces, otherwise we're going to run into naming collisions. So now the namespaces for the customer and invoice controllers are app HTTP controllers, API, and then V1. And we need to make that change on both of those, so let's just copy and paste. But this is also going to change the controller class that we are extending. We need to import that controller. So that's easy enough to do. We'll just import app HTTP controllers and then controller. And of course we need that in both of those files. So any controller that we are going to add to our API will need to make those changes. And let's go ahead and at least implement the customer controllers index method, so that we would then simply return all of the customers that we have in the database. Now we could take this a step further, and we could also version our models, because we could make changes to the database. However, those changes are typically adding new columns as opposed to changing the columns that are already there. So from that aspect, versioning your models is a little less common. Actually, it's a lot less common, but you could take the same approach. Now, of course, we need to set up the routes for these controllers. So let's go to the API. That aspect, versioning your models is a little that are all changes. Now we return controllers, those controller that we are going to go ahead and at least implement the customer controllers index method, so that we would then simply return all of the customers that we have in the database. Now we could take this a step further, and we could also version our models, because we could make changes to the database. However, those changes are typically adding new columns as opposed to changing the columns that are already there. So from that aspect, versioning your models is a little less common. Actually, it's a lot less common, but you could take the same approach. Now, of course, we need to set up the routes for these controllers. So let's go to the API file inside of routes. This is where we define the routes for our APIs. And we want to include the version in the URL itself, because every
over the edge, feel like I'm floating through the air. The pain I felt is paid for, all is said and done. Oh, I am restricted, fixed upon the web. I need to kick the habit that my mind is breathing in. Break out, I've got to see.
version should have a unique URL. And if you define a route inside of the API file, then your URL begins with API. So we would want then our version, v1 or v2 or whatever, and then our endpoints, such as customers or invoices or things like that. So one of the easiest ways to do this is to use a group. And there are several options that we can apply here. The first is going to be the prefix, and we can simply set the prefix to whatever version that we need. So this is the first version, so the prefix will be v1. That is going to append to the already existing prefix of API. So we will have API/v1. But we can also make our lives a little bit easier by also specifying the namespace, because all of our controllers reside within the same namespace, and that is simply going to be at HTTP controllers, and API, and then v1. And then from there, we just need to define our routes. Now, we essentially have resource controllers. However, these are a little bit different because they are for an API. We don't really need the create or edit endpoints. So we can use the API resource method. It essentially gives us the same thing, but it omits the create and edit endpoint, so that then we can specify our endpoints. So we have customers, and we would want to say that that is our customer controller. And then we will essentially do the same thing for our invoices, except we of course want the URL to be invoices, and the controller is invoice controller, and I believe that's customer controller. Okay, so with that in place, we should be able to go to the browser and at least hit the index route on our customer controller. So you of course need your application up and running, and I'm using Firefox because when it receives a JSON response, it will automatically parse it into something that is halfway readable. It's more than halfway readable, it's very readable. So our URL is going to be API/v1/customers, and we should see the output. And there we go. As I said, this is very readable. We can go through this, and if we wanted to scroll through all, two
in the sky, gazing far into the night. I raise my hand to the fire, but it's no use, 'cause you can't stop it from shining through. It's true, baby, let the light shine through. If you believe it's true, baby, won't you let the light shine through for you, 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 won't you let the light shine through? In the sky, gazing far into the night. I raise my hand to the fire, but it's no use, 'cause you can't stop it from shining through. It's true, baby, let the light shine through. If you believe it's true, baby, won't you let the light shine through for you, for you, for you, for you, for you, for you, for you,
dream, believe in strength. Now I'm the only one, only one. I was an ordinary boy until I broke the rules. My life destroyed, a life destroyed. Until I woke awake, scream my mind, I shout, the ground shakes. How much can I take? My mind will break. Will it break? Can I take? Can I be your superhero? Superhero. Can I be your superhero? Superhero. 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 Fly away. It's the first time of today. Today. To dream, believe. You are the strength, you're all I need. Need. Oh, gonna give it a shot. Only one of me to shield you all from the enemy. You're a superhero. You're a superhero. Can I be your superhero? Superhero. 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 Can I be your superhero? I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in their cradles, profanities. I see the world through eyes covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep. I love everything. Fire spreading all around my room. My world's so bright, it's hard to breathe, but that's alright. Hush. Take my eyes open to force reality. Why can't you just let me eat my weight in glee? I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in their cradles, profanities. Some days I feel skinnier than all the other days. Sometimes I can't tell if my body belongs to me. I love everything. Fire spreading all around my room. My world's so bright, it's hard to breathe, but that's alright. Hush. Shh. attention. Devils hide behind redemption. Honesty is a one-way gate to hell. I wanna taste consumption. Breathe faster to waste oxygen. Hear the children sing aloud. It's music till the wick burns out. Just wanna be carefree lately, yeah. Just kicking up daisies. Got one too many quarters in my pockets. Count 'em like the four-leaf clovers in my locket. Untied laces, yeah. Just tripping on daydreams. Got dirty little lullabies playing on repeat. Might as well just ride around the nursery and count sheep.